Today I'm going to talk about whether or not new coins are good or bad for the ecosystem of HEX. And as always, the answer is not simply a yes or a no. It's not black or white like you all want it to be, but I'm just going to give you my thoughts. And I'm going to tell you, stick around to the end as well because you might learn something. If you didn't like Hedron before, if you didn't understand what Icosa or Hedron were, I really think it's worth the time to at least look into them and then decide for yourself whether or not you think they're good or bad for you personally. And my goal is not even to convince you whether or not Hedron or Icosa are good or bad, but just to kind of decipher my thought process about when new coins do come into the ecosystem, do they support HEX in a way that I like or a way that I don't like? And it's just my 2 cents, right? I think HEX is an amazing coin, amazing invention, and I think Hedron and Icosa complement it in a way that I never really even thought possible. So I really respect Alex for what he's done. I think his coin was pretty revolutionary. And what it really did was it added to the feature set of HEX. So it gave HEX more use cases, more usability, and more stickiness, which is good for both external and internal, right? The new features are good for new people that might want to now use HEX that otherwise would not have. And the speculative stickiness aspect, the new games in town, keep people around longer. They keep people locked in the ecosystem, and people that might have sold either HEX or any of these other coins might now choose not to sell. So let's get into it. This chart on the screen behind me is a pretty advanced concept we're going to get into later. This is the HEX Icosa pair on a chart, and you'll notice it trends towards a straight line. So for advanced participants in this market, you can use this information to your advantage and actually probably profit from it through arbitrage if you are able to figure it out, and if you want to take that risk. As always, you don't even have to buy any of these two tokens. You don't have to buy HEX at all. I just think that if you don't pay attention to these two, and if you don't get HEX now while it's low, if you don't buy the dip in DCA, you could be missing what could be the greatest opportunity of a lifetime in terms of wealth generation and future financial freedom. So let's get right into it, okay? One thing Alex said on a previous stream was that you need to build in positive price performance, or essentially pumpamentals, into both coins for a coin to do well in the HEX ecosystem. And I agree. I like that Hedron, I need to get used to saying Hedron, not Hedron. I like that Hedron and HEX are both complementary to each other, and one does not necessarily detract from the other, okay? So although people might sell their HEX for Hedron, it actually doesn't hurt the price if the liquidity is high enough in that particular pair. We're going to get more into that later, but I also want to remind everybody that value creation is a positive sum game. So if you make a product that everybody likes, then we can all join in and win together, okay? Trading is a zero-sum game, as we all know, but value creation and wealth generation is a positive-sum game, because if you create something with product market fit and more people pile into it than leave, well, it can be good for the longer-term holders and the true believers, and it can be good for everybody, right? Because it's a pie that keeps on growing. The pie's getting bigger. You're not trying to take a slice out of a finite-sized pie, right? So our new coin's good for HEX. I bet you guys wish this was a yes or no answer, but it's obviously not. And you need to think about things in a nuanced perspective all the time. Okay, so really think before you draw a conclusion. The answer is sometimes. Sometimes new coins are good, sometimes they're bad, and it's on a spectrum. Okay, it's on a spectrum, just like everything. We're all in crypto, we're all a little bit on the spectrum, if you know what I mean. But no, anyway, basically, it can be no. The answer can be no. The answer can be absolutely not. This leeches mind share, and it's poison for HEX, it's poison for Pulse Chain, and everyone that's going to get wrecked. I've seen coins like that, and there's probably 95% of the coins that I get pitched. I mean, we're getting bombarded every day, let's be honest, with new pitches of meme coins and stuff that we need to be very skeptical about, because our attention is limited, our financial resources are limited, and it's the bear market. So you got to ask yourself, a lot of these new coins, right? Are they really getting new users in at the hardest time to get new users in? Or are they detracting from the overall mission? And my overall mission is to make as many people financially free as possible with the innovations that Richard Hart's built and other people have expanded on. Okay, I'm on Team HEX, Team Pulse Chain, and anything around that that's tangential to that, to me, is a good thing for the most part. So sometimes new coins are good for HEX. I believe Hedron is, and the question is not, is it good or bad, but how good is it for HEX? Is it kind of good? Is it really good? I think it's somewhere in the middle on that spectrum I just talked about. What people have to ask themselves when they're gauging these new coins are, were new features added to anything? Was new usability? Were there new use cases added? Does it solve any new problem? because new value propositions attract new users. This is a fact. If people can do something new, they might choose to join HEX when they otherwise might not have. So I gotta remind everybody that in order to create Hedron in general, the only way to mint Hedron, all Hedron had to originate from a HEX stake, okay? So if people want to play in the Hedron game, if they want to get these extra tokens that they can mint every single day, remember, your mintable Hedron is the number of days in your stake times the B shares in that stake. That's the number of Hedron you get per day, and so in order to even participate, you need to have a HEX stake in the first place. And in order to have a HEX stake, guess what? You have to buy HEX, right? It should be pretty obvious, but let's slow down and think. So I think Hedron actually ignites more attention around HEX and will eventually, and it has already provably, verifiably created a lot more stakes. It's extended the average stake length because a lot of people are creating max length stakes. And it's also, as a result of that, increased the buy pressure on HEX. I also just had a thought that I want to put in the video that I also realized that Hedron seems to be surpassing the censorship, the BS censorship from CoinMarketCap and CoinGecko, right? So we actually ironically just saw Hedron pass HEX in the ranks on the CoinMarketCap website that unfortunately some people actually use. So this could get more eyeballs as a Trojan horse by them not actually realizing that it's so related to HEX, which I think is pretty cool and funny. That even though HEX objectively has a much, much higher market cap than Hedron, CoinMarketCap manually moves it to rank 201 no matter what. And I think Hedron recently might have just passed that, so LOL. Now it also unlocks this new functionality, right? So there's tradable stakes, which unlocks things like over-the-counter deals. Alex mentioned this in a stream where I hadn't even considered, but if you want to facilitate an OTC deal between two institutions for even very, very high amounts of HEX, millions and millions of HEX, you can do this by wrapping the stake in an HSI and then having this stake being traded through an escrow contract. Like let's say a 30-day escrow contract, or you can make a 30-day stake and sell it to the other person, which ensures that they can't unlock that stake for 30 days. Now there's also some other new features that I frankly don't have enough room to list them all, but one of them is it attracts the degen crowd. Okay, so let's consider these group of degens out here that believe in this concept of daily divs or daily dividends, and they just can't help but watching the screen every day and come back for more, that little dopamine hit which so many people love, because people cannot delay gratification. Well, for these degens behavior, and by the way, shame on you if you're one of those people. I mean, learn to chill out, learn to delay your gratification, and come back later. The only people that really win in crypto are long-term holders, okay? If you try to, rat brain it and just come back to the screen every day feeling like you have to do something every day, the happy trigger finger often loses a lot of money, right? But in Hedron, right, you can mint Hedron every single day. So it gives those guys something to do. If you really feel like you got to click a button every day, well, here's a button to click that'll mint you something that's debatably beneficial for the whole ecosystem. And that's what I'm trying to convey right now. So you can wrap and sell over the counter. You can double wrap it. So you can wrap it as an HSI, and then you can wrap that as an NFT. And then you can sell that NFT on OpenSea. So people look at this as, oh, it's just tradable stakes. It's not adding any buy or sell pressure. Yeah, well, on the other hand, everything is a double-sided sword. It's also getting in front of the eyeballs of the NFT community, okay? It legitimizes HEX in the eyes of people that might like NFTs. So if you go on Rarible or OpenSea or hexmarket.com, which somebody just built, you can see a bunch of these tradable stakes, these Hedron encapsulated stakes for sale. And, it shows you the amount of shares and everything. So it's just one more platform to promote HEX. And it's offering or extending an olive branch to the NFT community and giving them something that they're familiar with and maybe overlapping and leeching some of their users into our more wholesome ecosystem. Now, obviously, you can stake Hedron and stake Icosa for more of each other, so it's self-referential. That's just, a meme that's proven to be sticky in crypto in general. Everybody wants yield, everybody wants staking, and this staking is done trustlessly, decentralized, and all of the yield comes from very well thought out equations. Basically, in the case of Icosa, it tapers off over time because the T-share rate goes up, and the calculation of Icosa rewards is based off of burned Hedron divided by the T-share rate. Might be a little advanced for people. And also the Hedron, it takes sell pressure off the market when people choose to stake their Hedron. You guys should already know this. Again, watch my old videos, but you only get one stake of each per wallet, one Icosa stake and one Hedron stake per wallet. And there's no maximum on these stakes. There's only a minimum. So there is a minimum, which I think is a good thing because that means that you actually have to see the stake through. It does stagger the sell pressure into the future, where not everybody is becoming unstaked at once, similar to HEX, right? And there's also emergency end stake penalties as well. Not as severe as in HEX, but there are penalties for not putting your money where your mouth is and not doing what you said you were going to do or staying true to your word. I like all these things. These things are all good. And finally, you can actually sell wrapped stakes back for Icosa, and those go back on the liquidation market to be sold to somebody that values them more than the Icosa that was given to the person who essentially sold their stake for Icosa. So if people want to bail out of their stakes and they have a wrapped stake, well, they can actually sell it for a different token rather than liquidate it for USDC, right? This is actually a good thing. So a lot of new people might be interested in HEX that now otherwise would not be because this new layer on top of HEX is being built. Now, this is an idea of mine as a metric to gauge how internally sticky and successful a derivative product of HEX might be, is you can look at the ratio of HEX adopters to Hedron adopters, or Icosa adopters, or Maxi adopters, or, pick XYZ coin. It doesn't matter, but you can actually look at the ratios to see maybe how sticky it's making these coins. So, because Hedron has, let's say, 20,000 users, holders right now, and we know there's about 100,000 active stakers in the HEX ecosystem. Well, that's about 1 out of every 5 people in HEX is also into Hedron. And when this internal stickiness is created, these people who might have otherwise sold their HEX now have one more reason to hold it because there's a new game in town. There's a new thing to play. And even if they do want to get rid of some HEX in exchange for Hedron, as long as the liquidity conditions are right, which they are currently right now, it doesn't actually hurt the HEX price. So we'll get into liquidity in a little bit, but I want to also say that founders both seemed to signal benevolence. By the founders, I mean the source address in Hedron and the origin address in HEX. Now, the origin address in HEX could still flip off Hedron pretty much at any time because they own so much. They could obviously crush the price at any time if they saw Hedron starting to go awry, right? But the fact that the origin address basically put up sell-side liquidity on the liquidity pair and hasn't really done much else, this is a relatively bullish thing in my opinion. This signals that as long as Hedron isn't deemed to be hurting HEX, the game keeps going and it stays alive. And obviously, for reasons that I'll get into at the end, so stick around to the very end because I'm going to talk about these really cool Easter eggs that you might not be aware of yet. But essentially, the source address in Hedron particularly signaled very much benevolence for his own project, and the founders came on stream saying multiple times that he wouldn't have even built this thing if he didn't think it was going to help pump the price of HEX, right? If it was going to add to HEX, he wouldn't have even designed it. So this whole thing was designed with the end game in mind, for HEX to rule everything. HEX on Pulse Chain with PulseX and the Richard Heart vertical ecosystem, the walled garden, if you will, giving everybody a method to financial freedom and being what crypto was truly supposed to be, right? So we saw that the source address burned both Hedron and Maxi in some pretty creative ways. We'll get into that at the very end. And the origin address, actually, with a lot of the free Hedron that he or she minted, they actually put up a sell wall on the Hedron HEX pair. Okay, so they basically made it safe for people that did want to swap from HEX to Hedron to do so swapping directly, not cashing out for USDC. Because remember, the price only goes down in an asset if you swap it for USDC and sell it down on a DEX, that is, right? If you're on a DEX and you just trade one coin for another coin, well, if there's enough liquidity in that pair, and there is in the HEX Hedron pair, you can swap directly and you change the ratio of HEX and Hedron terms and vice versa, but you don't actually affect the underlying ratio of HEX or Hedron in USDC terms. Obviously, everything is always fluctuating and it's so complex that people are always cashing out of Hedron and HEX for USDC, and they're always buying Hedron and HEX for USDC. But in an isolated ecosystem, if somebody swapped HEX directly for Hedron and nothing else changed, the price would stay the same. That's a fact. Now I want to touch on this point I mentioned earlier too. It also diverts potential sell pressure away from people that might have sold it for USDC, and it diverts that sell pressure into non-US dollar coins. Now someone that might have wanted to dump HEX, those pesky whales or shark dumpers that we see, well, they might say, hey, wait, there's these other things to do now. There's these other coins to collect. Maybe I want to swap my HEX for Hedron or swap my HEX for Icosa or even for Ethereum, right? All these things are technically better than selling HEX for US dollar coin on the market. I should say that with the caveat, as long as people aren't dumping the crap out of the other coins too. So because of this, we need to make sure liquidity conditions are ideal. And that's another important question you need to ask yourself when saying how good a new coin is for HEX. So part of this depends on the liquidity pool ratio of the new coin or coins to HEX. So right now in the Hedron liquidity pools, we could see roughly there's about an equal amount of liquidity in the HEX Hedron pair as there is in the USD Hedron pair. Now, because of this, it gives people an equal ability to push the price up if they want to buy direct with USDC, or it gives people an ability to go sideways and do a HEX to Hedron conversion without pushing the price down. And because Hedron doesn't really have any other pairs that it's paired to other than HEX, this is a good thing. You know, if there was a giant Hedron pair, Hedron versus Bitcoin, I would say, oh, that's probably not a good thing, because when Bitcoin dumps more, it's just going to drag Hedron down with it. But because these are the two primary liquidity pairs, this is actually a very ideal thing, okay? USDC is dominant right now, cash is king right now, and also HEX is and always will be king, in my opinion, right? So you want to be paired to those two things. And now, for Icosa as well, 9/10 of the liquidity are paired to either Ethereum, HEX, or Hedron, and the rest is USD, okay? But so much liquidity in Icosa is paired to these other coins, especially HEX and Hedron. The vast majority is in HEX and Hedron. That they're all self-referential, and if you want to swap one for another, you can go in a full circle without ever touching the US dollar price. This is a very good thing, and the smart money in HEX, the liquidity providers, know this, and people know that if you want to make liquidity plays and collect all three of these coins, you put up liquidity in the HEX-Hedron pair, the Hedron-Icosa pair, or the Icosa-HEX pair. I mean, it's kind of like we're going to do with PLS, PulseX, and HEX. I mean, it's what I've been talking about earlier. We have HEX, Pulse, and PulseX, and we provide a lot of liquidity in these triangular pairs. People can slosh around in between these pairs without having to cash out. So it sucks more money in for various reasons, right? People might like one particular feature on PulseX, one particular feature on Hedron, and then they might just want to do their staking ladder. And once they have all these coins, they can trade one for another, all in a circular fashion, okay? So speculative stickiness is what keeps people in the game, and new functionality is what attracts outside people into the game. You got to ask yourself when a new coin comes out, is there enough in both of these regions? Okay, long story short, is there enough stickiness to add to HEX, both internally and externally? My verdict on the Hedron fiasco, and also on the Maxi, but I haven't really seen too much else yet that I really love that supports the ecosystem so well. My opinion is yes, these couple of things are good for HEX. I mean, it's going to be few and far between. It's not going to happen often. But when it does happen, I'm going to be very interested and I'm going to talk about it because I know there's a lot of other smart people out there in the ecosystem that want to hear about it. Now, Icosa brings yet another layer of stickiness to HEX. 2 layers of stickiness, right? And they're all self-referential, like I said. You can stake one for the other and vice versa. And really, it's better that money stays in the self-referential ecosystem than directly out into memes, okay? I mean, if you see a meme coin pop up that's sucking economic energy out of HEX, this is clearly not ideal, right? It's better that everyone just focuses on one thing rather than a short-lived meme coin that probably won't last more than one cycle, that probably won't ever achieve the gains that HEX is poised to do in the next bull market. It's just better that the attention stays in the ecosystem. So if you're going to degen, maybe degen in games that are a little more wholesome, okay? Now here are some hard concepts that I want to talk about that'll be difficult to explain, but if you explain them and they click for you, the light bulb might go off, okay? So if you look at the HEX Icosa chart, look at this chart, guys. This is HEX in Icosa terms, and it's at about 1 HEX is worth 0.0337 of an Icosa. And you'll notice that this typically tends to stabilize around a flat line. Why? That's because in order to mint Icosa, the primary way to do that, now that the What's Up bonus is over, and I'm not even going to talk about We Are All Source Address NFTs. Those are over. They're done. The only way to mint new Hedron, besides staking rewards, is to cash in a HEX stake, a wrapped HEX stake, and you get Icosa. But how much Icosa do you get for that stake? Well, it's dictated by this equation that you see at the bottom, right? It goes by the amount total borrowable Hedron on your stake that you could totally mint if you multiply all the days in the stake times all the B shares in the stake, that number of Hedron divided by the share rate. And again, the times 1.1 is only for the 10% bonus. So if you don't have a max length stake, it's just times 1. So if you're wondering where that 1.1 comes from, that's just 1.1 for the 10% extra. But this simple equation, borrowable Hedron divided by T-share rate times any bonuses equals the mintable Icosa. And because the share rate goes up every day, guys, what happens when the denominator of something gets bigger? The number at the end goes down, okay? If you're not a math person. Basically, the mintable Icosa, every single day, Icosa gets a little bit more scarce. And it gets harder and harder to mint Icosa because the HEX share rate is going up all the time. And because of this, HEX will always track the Icosa price. And the share rate, by going up, actually pulls the Icosa price up in HEX terms. So Icosa right now is worth about 30 HEX, right? If you take the inverse of this chart, 1 over 0.0337 is about 30. So right now today it's about 30 HEX to get one Icosa. And as the share rate goes up, in a couple of weeks or months it'll be 31 HEX and 32 HEX and 33 HEX. And so Icosa gets more valuable and scarce. And so HEX goes down relative to Icosa, right? But that's just this direct comparison. So it's vice versa. HEX is always going down compared to Icosa, and Icosa is always going up in HEX terms. But as long as HEX goes up in USD terms, this is great for the whole ecosystem, okay? And people are clearly doing arbitrage right now, and I expect people arbitraging this even more in the future so that this line will continue to be even more flat, right? You can see someone just sold the wick down, right back down to 0.0337. Another thing that I was thinking about is that as so many people make these HSIs to get Icosa coin liquid, the average stake length goes up, and potentially a lot. This could be good or bad, whatever you think. But again, overall, it's good in terms of HEX becoming more scarce, right? HEX becoming more scarce and more people buying HEX. And if people buy it and the supply goes away, and people buy it and stake it and supply goes away, that basically triggers the ideal flow that was designed into HEX, that was programmed into HEX. When HEX was programmed to pump, it was programmed to pump if everybody did this. And Hedron is making it so that everybody is doing the thing that's optimal in the system. So Hedron gets burned also as liquidation auctions get popular, which means Hedron also gets taken out of the ecosystem. And so not only is HEX getting more scarce, but Hedron's getting more scarce as well because of this system, okay? And Alex, I actually heard him admit this on a previous live stream that Icosa was always the end game. And Hedron was just launched earlier with the end in mind. So Icosa, I didn't even realize this, but Icosa was always his end game. And he launched Hedron, gave the bonus to whales, and then just basically gave them 90 days to shake themselves out. Whoever wanted to sell could have sold. I didn't think too much of Hedron when it first came out. I thought it was kind of interesting enough for me to just hold my coin, see what happens. But now that this Icosa thing is coming into play, it's kind of all starting to make sense. And it's pretty cool to me. I think it's pretty cool. But that's one more point where a lot of people can rest assured that all the sell pressure that would have sold early on in Hedron has probably already sold for the near term, for the time being. Okay. Now there might still be the occasional whale or shark out there that wants to dump a whole bunch on the market because they might still be there, guys. They might still be there. But me personally, I have a very low time preference. My stakes are all as long as they can be, right? And I don't really see myself selling any of this for much less than 1,000x or 100x maybe, We'll have to play it by ear, right? But we're far away from that. So we've got a lot of room to grow, which is kind of exciting to me. So guys, if nothing else, if you really don't care about Hedron, I get it if it's too complicated and you don't want to give it any of your mind space. You've got a life, right? You can't spend all day thinking about random crypto projects. I totally get it, all right? But you might be leaving a little money on the table if you forget to mint your Hedron before ending a stake. So for that reason alone, I kind of suggest going to app.icosa.pro. That's the unified front end. It's in the description below, app.icosa.pro, and actually just checking to see if you have any mintable Hedron. If it's not worth that much and you don't think it's going to be worth anything in the future, you can totally leave it alone. It does cost gas to mint your Hedron, right? So if you've got like 1 million Hedron and it's not worth enough for you to care about it, don't do it. I don't really care. It's totally up to you whether you want to be involved or not, but you don't necessarily have to just sell this free Hedron that you get for US dollars either, right? You could sell it for more HEX. So if getting HEX is your goal, why wouldn't you want to mint more Hedron and then just sell it for more HEX? It's like you're basically just able to amplify the amount of HEX that you have. I mean, that's essentially my goal, is to have the most HEX, right? I want to keep accumulating the primary asset. And this will let you do that, right? This will let you do that if you mint your Hedron, which is free for anyone that stakes, whether it's legacy or a new stake. It doesn't have to be these new wrap stakes, these new fancy HSIs. If you got an old-fashioned stake, you can still mint Hedron. You might want to check it out. You could also sell it for Icosa. So basically, you've got two other options in which to sell your Hedron for other than USDC. So it's not just like you're just dumping on people's heads. You can dump it back into HEX or into Icosa or into whichever market or pool that somebody wants to trade for you. There's a whole group of people that at this current moment in time, they value Icosa higher. They might want to sell their HEX for Icosa. And there's a whole group of people that at this moment in time, they're valuing HEX higher. And they want to swap their Hedron for HEX. I like to buy low, sell high. So when I see, Hedron high relative to HEX, that's usually a symbol for me to kind of swap the Hedron back into HEX, right? That seems like a decent idea. Or if Hedron is low compared to HEX, like it was for the past 3-4 months, it looks like a decent opportunity to get in. Now, if you're still here, congratulations. You're smarter than 99.9% of all crypto out there. I mean, if you're in HEX in general, you're probably already ahead of the curve a little bit. So Easter eggs I wanted to talk about, where we talked about the source address burning HEX. He actually burned very specific amounts of HEX. Just recently, he burned 77 trillion, 800, blah, 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 Hedron. And if you do a decimal to ASCII conversion, this actually translates in readable human letters to move USDC to HEX. MV USDC to HEX. I do wonder why he didn't just say buy HEX, but move USDC to HEX. Maybe he's indicating some of like his next move, or maybe he's just signaling or advertising or promoting HEX. Guys, if you can't figure it out or read between the lines, sounds like Alex is pretty bullish on HEX, and it sounds like he wants HEX to pump, okay? So I'm reading into these burning the tokens in this particular way as a signal to say, hey guys, I'm not going to screw you guys over. I'm on your team, and we're all on the same team. It's team win, okay? We're all going to win. Now, even before this is pretty funny. He burned 87,000 something coins, and this translates to win moon. So just kind of a funny troll there. Basically signaling that he's kind of a friendly guy, right? And on top of all this, he burned 1 trillion Hedron just the other day. A trillion's a lot. A trillion is 1,000 billion. So if you're even a Hedron billionaire, congratulations. But this is 1,000 of those billions that were just taken off the market. And why would somebody do that? Why would somebody, instead of dumping them for US dollars, and guys, this was about $9 million worth of Hedron. Somebody just burned $9 million worth of their coin to signal basically benevolence. And the burn function is actually called proof of benevolence. So I don't know how much more obvious it can get here. I'm just going to say it out loud. Like it's a benevolent whale. Okay. And if it's not, then it's a total and complete psychopath with no remorse at all, which would be kind of funny. Flow address also burned 1 million maxi. I mean, 1 million maxi is about 2 million HEX today. So what's that? About $80,000 at today's prices. Why would somebody just burn $80,000? The typical pleb, the typical scarcity mindset person cannot fathom doing anything like this. If they had $80,000, they'd cash it out right away. Clearly, this is somebody that doesn't need money, that doesn't care about the money, that's doing this for the overall ecosystem. Okay. Now, the flow address is what got money from all the we are also source address NFTs. The flow address could use maxi, all the maxi that was given to it, to actually enter the team pool. And the team launch happens in a few days, I think. So I think it would be interesting to see. This is all speculation, but because it burned 1 million maxi, will it now buy team and be one of the largest team holders? Time will tell. And finally, there was an origin address liquidity wall. The origin address got a lot of Hedron for free, just like everybody else, right? And instead of just dumping it for USDC, it chose to put a sell wall on the HEX Hedron pair. And basically, for anyone that wanted to convert their HEX to Hedron, it gobbled up all that HEX and gave them the Hedron. Okay? And that sell wall's been eaten through. And that's kind of why we've been seeing this little pumperoni going on the Hedron price chart, which won't last forever. And it might actually flip-flop in the opposite direction. It might go back and forth. And we'll have these phases, just like I predicted for PLS and PulseX and HEX. We might have these phases where HEX is kind of trendy this month, and then Hedron is trendy this month. And they kind of all vary between each other, just giving us more to focus our attention on besides other than cashing out. Okay. These are the Easter eggs. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I hope you like what you hear. Obviously, like and subscribe. And if you're brand new to crypto and it sounds like I'm speaking a foreign language, you might want to get the course. I'll take everything from square one. If this is way over your head, I get it. But for the OGs or the people that are really into this kind of game theory, these are my 2 cents on the matter. But for now, that's all I got. So I'll see you on the next one.